That's working. Lovely.
So
Right.
right, I've got to nip onto a Zoom.
Should I get I'll put my PowerPoint up, Rosie. Should I on my share screen? Get that sorted.
You should be already able to share your screen.
Yeah, I think I am. Oh no, host has disabled the participant screen sharing. Very controlling, Rosie.
Oh, it's Tam's account. I'm going to blame Tam.
Ah,
there we go. There we go. How's that?
I think that's it. And if I do that, you should have a screenshot or a slideshow.
Yep, good.
Cool.
Perfect. Well, I'll get started just by introducing you, if that's all right, and then we'll make a start.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's just a few more people joining. So welcome everyone. It's nice to see so many of you turn up again to one of these talks. This evening we've got Ali Andrews, who's dialing in all the way from Wales. So he's on lockdown in Wales, which I think's pretty strict, even compared to England. But hopefully he'll be able to give us a bit of an insight into hike and fly and flying in Wales. And that'll give us all something to dream about when we've got these dark, cold nights and we're stuck inside. We can think about all the flying we can do in the summer. So I'll pass you straight over to Ali, who can introduce himself and then get cracking.
Thanks very much, Rosie, and thanks everyone for having me tonight. It's lovely to be invited. See a lot of friendly and familiar faces as well. We've already had a chat in the last few minutes. That's fantastic on, like you say, dark January evening, where it would have been very unlikely I'd have been able to make the trip up in better times. So at least there's a bit of light there somewhere that we're able to do this sort of thing on Zoom. So yeah, I'm Alistair Andrews. I run a paragliding school called Crickhowell Paragliding. And we're based in the Black Mountains, which is part of the Brecon National Park in Wales. And I'm also the organizer of the Dragon Hike and Fly race, which hopefully a lot of you might have read about recently in the Skywings magazine. And that race is now 3 years old. So we had 4 events. So as Rosie said, quite a broad subject, just invite me along to chat. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what we do here and some about the race and talk a little bit about how you might do a little bit more hike and fly as well, if that's something that interests you. So this is our playgrounds. So on the phone here from Crickhowell, which is where I'm moving my little mouse around. We're on the eastern side of the Brecon Beacons National Park. In the middle of the map there, you've got the central beacon. So Pen y Fan is our big mountain that people are getting turned away from every day. 500 cars turning up during lockdown, all the way from London and all that. But the rest of the hills don't get hiked anywhere near as much because that one hill seems to attract everyone. So we've got a lot of quiet places where we can go and fly, uncrowded skies, much like you guys do up in the Dales. And then to the south of that main road, the A465, the landscape changes dramatically. And we've got a series of valleys that run north-south with a vast number of flying sites and unofficial places where we can take off as well. That essentially allow cross-country in a northeast-southwest direction, as you can see from the track logs there on the screen. On the right-hand side of the map, you've also got that bright red line running north-south, and that's the Pandy Ridge, which you may have flown or heard of. And it's probably the reason why in better times we had over 600 members. So 2019, we had 600 members in the local flying club. And most of those coming from England to fly Pandy on a lovely day where we've got northeasterly winds. You can do a 20-kilometer out and return as a new CP. So we're blessed really with some fantastic flying sites, both for training, hike and fly, and just regular flying for top flight. The other things to note, I suppose, you can like take off and land anywhere. Again, much like in the Dales, I suppose, not in a not in the practical sense as in a permission point of view, but from a safety point of view, we don't have large forested areas, we don't have built up areas. So the tops of the hills are broadly amazing for hike and fly, just because the place looks like Hobbiton. Between here and Brecon, there's a little place called Buckland Hall, and that's where Tolkien stayed when he wrote The Hobbit. And it was based, the landscape was based on this area. And something else that struck me was we had some guys last year come and do the Dragon Hike and Fly from the Pyrenees. And having flown there, I was blown away by the mountains. But they're a very wild place to fly. You can't really take off or land anywhere in the Pyrenees. It's covered in trees or vertical limestone rock faces. And they just love this place. We have hills that you can walk up in an hour, tops like 600 meters, maybe more. But you can just take off, you can land, it's chill, you do some soaring, you climb out to 5,000 feet, and you're like a mile above the terrain. And these guys in the Pyrenees aren't used to that. When you fly in the big mountains, you're always close to the ground. I think that's true in most mountainous places around the world. You're at high altitude, but you're very close to terrain. Whereas here, it's and where you guys are, we're very lucky, and we should remember how blessed we are really with sites like South Wales and Yorkshire and the Lake District for those reasons. So I thought I'd just introduce my background a little bit. So I grew up around here, just to the right-hand side of that map, near Abergavenny. And when I was 18, so I had been flying model airplanes, and I used my first student loan to buy a paraglider, which was a DHV 2.3, which is now equivalent to a D glider, maybe a little bit hotter than a normal D wing. And it was a 1993 wing. So this was in 2003. Now, some dealer sold this to me on eBay for £100. So I don't know what they were thinking, but trying to get rid of a bit of old stock. The thing was crispy in its bag, but it was 10 years old, hot as hell. Somehow I survived teaching myself to ridge soar on this thing. But I suppose because of that, I had to avoid the club flying sites because I just wasn't able to integrate with the club because I was not qualified. So hike and fly was paragliding to me. And so that's how I started. And it was quite normal to put an hour's walk in for then probably like a 3 or 4 minute top to bottom, running off through Brecon, crosswind, in completely the wrong place. So it was an interesting way to learn. But I think, yeah, for me, it was a good way to cut my teeth. And luckily I survived and got through that stage. I then joined the Royal Navy. So in 2006, joined the Royal Navy and was very lucky over time to become a search and rescue pilot. So that took about 5 years to become qualified, something like that. But in the meantime, if I became a qualified paraglider pilot, I'd have all these opportunities because the Royal Navy and the armed services in general have fantastic clubs, overseas trips, and that sort of thing. So I found a local instructor, and he very kindly just saw me fly for an afternoon. I'd already done the club pilot exam with the military, and he ticked me off as a club pilot. So that was it. I was on the road then, and poacher turned gamekeeper, quickly progressed through some of the ratings, became a trainee instructor and a coach, and really, threw myself into the sport. Absolutely loved it from the off, really, and everything that it's had to offer. Around 2012, I was very lucky to have done some traveling with the military clubs. I flew in Piedrahita, and I remember one flight was like 6 hours long. Also was lucky in the UK to fly 100k for the first time, and something clicked in the flying. I joke, I don't know, joking maybe, but I started wearing a P tube, and suddenly I didn't have to land after like an hour and a half anymore. And so this concentration was there, and the ability to stay in the air for longer meant that I was able to fly further. And suddenly I was sending quite big flights, and I was just loving cross country flying, as well as flying hike and fly and all sorts of things. Around that time, hike and fly racing was starting to become a bigger thing. So Borns to Fly, I think, started a few years before that. I don't know the exact date, but 2016 was the first time I could practically do it. I was qualified, had a little bit more free time. I could plan some leave, and I was very lucky that a good friend, Dan, was spending a season out in Chamonix, and he was my supporter. We then raced again together, both of us competing. We then both had girlfriends who supported us in 2017, which was cool. And then in 2018, I was very lucky. I'd been selected for the Xperia in 2014 and 2016. But 2014, I think I would have been a bit green, having done it in 2018. It was a big undertaking. 2016, might have been ready to do it, but I couldn't get the time off, couldn't get any support. Something like Born to Fly, it's a bit of a trip. You know, you go to Annecy, it's very easy to get there. It's 3 days. If you do very well, you give your supporter a day off on a Sunday because you finish in 2. Whereas the Xperia, it's a week. You're starting and finishing in different places. You got to cross the Pyrenees. But yeah, more on that in a little bit. And yeah, I think with the school and anyone that we do training with and guiding, I like to pass some of this stuff on. So I'm not really the sort of guy to throw the glider out the back of the car straight onto the side of the flying site. I think I value the experience of walking up the mountain. I like to pass that on to the students, and the guys are leaving the school here often with quite lightweight gear. So not like super light stuff, but 4.5 kilo glider and a reversible harness. So from the off, they're experienced at flying in quite big mountains with the school. So the prospect of going to bigger hills isn't a surprise, and they're used to walking up, which I think will come on to some of the things sort of the values that I think hike and fly flying gives you, but it sort of, yeah, sets them off with the right attitude perhaps towards that style of flying. So that's Dan and me in 2016 in the pub in Talwaz, having completed a brutal 48 hours of Born to Fly. It would have been a very chilled out 3 days, I think, but we pushed and managed to finish the race in 2 days. Dan was an incredible supporter. He's so fit, it's ridiculous. The guy walks at 7k an hour on the flat, and you might recognize his face because he won the Dragon Hike and Fly this year, having finished second and third for the past couple of years. So an amazing supporter, and we had a fantastic time. And really, that for both of us was the start of this interest in hike and fly. And something like Born to Fly, you must have a supporter. It's part of the rules. But you could do it with a rental car from Geneva and a tent, or if you're lucky, you take a camper van out and do it professionally. But it's a simple enough race to be able to do it. There's just a little, very unprofessional team with some sort of semi hike and fly gear. So this is the first takeoff. I was flying END in the UK, so at the time it was an Ozone Mantra 6, and I thought, I should tone down the wing a little bit for the mountains, because although I had some experience of flying in Annecy, I knew that we'd be flying in some bigger mountains over the back. And so I flew a BGD Tala Light, which is a lovely, soft EN, I think high B glider. But at the time I was only using Super Delight 2 harness, so the bag was like 10, 12 kilos. It was fine, really great couple of days. Glider like that, and any sort of semi-light wing and harness is a fantastic way to start hike and fly. Even racing like this in Born to Fly, Crickhowell had taken off only, I think, a minute or two before, and we were away racing. So yeah, just to show that you can do this sort of stuff on fairly normal equipment. You'll see the flying conditions aren't particularly normal, and we ended up able to ridge saw maybe 10k to the east before landing and doing a bit more hiking. But yeah, that was my first takeoff in a hike and fly race. Unfortunately, Dan wasn't available for the Xperia in 2018. He was now an airline pilot working his socks off for EasyJet. So I was blessed to have my wife volunteer. She was the only person who volunteered to help me. And she'd had a fairly illustrious career as a paraglider pilot. She trained, I think, a year or two before in Spain. I won't say who with. And then we went on holiday to Bassano del Grappa, had a fantastic week. And on her birthday, she managed to crash into lamppost, or not lamppost, telegraph pole, luckily not electricity. And she stopped paragliding then, but she decided that she would be my supporter for the XP of the year after. Now, Rebecca's interest in actually supporting was quite low. She was more interested in the after party, the fact that there were going to be some beers, a bit of traveling across the Pyrenees in a camper van. And yeah, we had a good time, but we were the only husband and wife team in that race, and I can tell you why. Other teams who perhaps were more experienced had never attempted the idea of a husband and wife team. A picture of the radios there just to remind me that even during the race I had to remind her to how to turn the radio when she's supposed to be my prime supporter. I was very lucky. By then Telegram had kicked off big time in the UK, and there's a like Alps XP Sados group on Telegram, and the guys are amazing because I would just ask what the weather forecast was for the next 12 hours. I was on live tracking. I could even text from the air and ask for some directions if people had good ideas about what was going on in the race ahead. So luckily Rebecca had quite a chilled out time, and by day 4 she was having lie-ins, which I think is unheard of in week-long hike and fly races for the supporter. They're supposed to be just as tired, if not more so, than the athlete, as they call you. So it was a fairly brutal race, the XP. That's after 3 days. I'd only had a little bit of flying, really stable conditions, as you can see with that inversion below. But finally made it up to this beautiful mountain. And this was a fantastic day. It was the biggest day I'd had in the race. It was a defining day for the middle of the pack, because we were already way behind the leaders. But I was lucky. I had a 100k day, so I put some distance into other competitors. I had 2 flights. I landed on the mountain at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon at 70k in, something like that. Flew again past some really big mountains with huge clouds, but the XP Sados had told me it was a cool route to do, so that was good. Followed their advice, and then ended up with a bit of a hike up to a ski station, and then took off in the evening. In the background of this photo, lee side winds kicking in. It was really challenging. And then came down. Rebecca's on the radio, and she neglected to tell me that the wind was 25 miles an hour blowing down the valley as I came into land. But luckily, it's a huge car park, as you could see, and once again survived. So yeah, made it through that day. And we had a couple of other days flying. A fantastic experience in that race. By now, we'd already had 1 dragon hike and fly back in the UK. So it started 2017. This is 2018. And that was the last hike and fly race that I've done. I've unfortunately been sort of plagued by niggly injuries since then. I suppose it's only 2019 that I missed, but with a slipped L3, L4 at the moment, I'm hoping that maybe I'll be able to get back into this sort of thing in maybe this year or maybe next year. But at the moment, I'm an organizer and enthusiastic hike and fly non-competitive, having had a fantastic time there in 2018. That's another just a moment of calm. That was I think 2 days later in the race. Another 3 hours hiking in the morning to get up to this meadow with Andy, who was another person supporting me. We found this trough of water, like cowbells ringing, exhausted, people running along the road at the bottom, trying to make up places. And we just took 5 minutes until the vultures started climbing and had another wonderful flight. So you got a mixture here of this like serene, beautiful meadow, and then the wildness of flying in the Pyrenees with nowhere to land, covered in electronics and cameras, because you have to for these sorts of events where they try and get to film it, almost everything that you do. But yeah, I was quite glad to be sat down at that moment.
Hey Ali,
yeah.
How big is the XP arena?
How big, as in this distance, or
Yeah.
So it's from the west coast of the Pyrenees, in a place called Ondarrabia, and you race to Port de la Selva, which is one of these really flash resort places on the Mediterranean. Now, of course, just like the X-Alps, the original route was just to go pretty much from A to B via some turn points. And by 2018, they'd put a double crossing of the mountains in. So I got about halfway, and I finished 23rd on day 7. I think there were 40 competitors to start with. A huge attrition rate in that race. I think perhaps a worse voluntary attrition rate than in the X Alps, because they have the cut, which is that really cruel cut at the back. But the guys were just getting injured. Like, I'm serious. There is nowhere to land. So guys were going into trees and getting bashed up on rocks. It's brutal. And then you've got the weather as well, like 40 degrees plus. The race is in June, July, super hot. Even the start, you've got a half marathon from the coast. You start on the beach. So you've got sand in your shoes when you start. And then you've got to do a half marathon to the bottom of the hill. Then it's 900 meters vertical to the top. And if you get there about an hour late, it's stable, the sea airs come in, it's useless. And if you're super, super fit, you've maybe had a 50K XC. So the group is just blown apart right at the start. Greg Hamilton did the race, I think in 2014 or 2016. And I think he would admit it, he collapsed on that hike up. And you'll see it in his own videos that he was like an hour, 2 hours late, like all jittery and stuff. I wasn't in any better state when I got up to the top, like pouring lemonade down you and like packets of salt and things. It's hell of an experience. But I suppose this is something else to mention about the hike and fly. It's a broad scene, and it can be non-competitive. You can walk up your local hill in the most chilled way. You could do an event like this with some friends, like try and fly across the Pyrenees. You would have the most fantastic experience. If you took 3 weeks to do this, it would be beautiful. And I joke about having nowhere to land. If you planned the days, of course you could have places to land. But when you're flying turn point to turn point and they're putting you into these situations by route choice, it's a completely different experience when it's against the clock.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in size, it's like the second race compared to the X Alps. So it's a big race for sure. But yeah,
Cheers.
Cheers, Pete. So slightly closer to home, like having done Borns to Fly, I just loved it. That idea of the shorter format, 2 or 3 days in a beautiful place, really sort of collegiate feel to it, really friendly. So I thought, why don't we do it here? We've got the place. The only thing we don't have, of course, is like May just flyable all the time as it is perhaps in the Alps. But even there, it's not perfect. So I thought, let's try and organise a race here. So we started in 2017. It's 2 days, so it's just on a weekend, Saturday and Sunday. We brief on the Friday evening, and of course this year we just did that on Zoom. So there were people travelling or still at home on the Friday evening. So it's really accessible. And when I say pitched at all levels and race in inverted commas, there are guys coming now they love the idea of it being 2 days just so that they get to stay out in the hills on the first night. Like they're bringing bivy kit. They don't need to. They want to stay out in the hills just for this experience of using these paragliders, arguably for what they're supposed to be used for. And pitched at all levels. Well, we've got guys who are in their second season entering. There's one chap, and he's used it as his target to get fit. So he weighed something like 125 kgs. Like barely get a glider that would fit him. And he started walking up the Malvern Hills every day until he was fit enough to come and do the race. And he's lost like 20 odd kilos. We have another local challenge where we do a 3 peaks, local sort of 3 peaks hills. And he's got one of the fastest times just from this this inspiration of doing some hike and fly. So it's an event really that is for everyone. And certainly things like the route choice, I don't make it overly complicated. You could almost do it without a GPS if you knew your way around. The distance is usually something like 50 to 100 kilometers. Of course, if you're a top cross-country pilot, I joked with Harry Bloxham the second year he could have probably done the route in one flight if he'd had a good day on his Enzo, but of course he'd have had to carry 25 kilos up the first hill. But I think he'd have only needed to do it once. Of course, 50 or 100 Ks when you're on the ground is a bigger undertaking. But as I've already said, we've got so many places where you can get off the ground again. And the route is built such that you can take off again. Like in September, the race that we had at the end of the lockdown, within the first 15k of the race, there were 4 takeoffs. So even if you had one flop, you could get up again. You could have a second flop. You still have some morale, you know, that you're going to get back in the air and have another bite of the cherry. And lots of people did, which makes for quite an interesting race for those who are interested in racing, because there's a lot of leapfrogging as well within the places. Yeah, as I've said, I'm trying to advertise this place to come and fly and join us. It is ideal for it, as I'm sure the Yorkshire Dales are as well. And as I'm sure you're no doubt aware, the discipline, in whatever guise it is, be it racing or just the idea of having a lightweight rucksack, is growing in popularity. Most of the manufacturers now are offering lightweight gliders. I think there was a bit of a myth that the gliders didn't last very long. I think they do now, especially if you, just a technical thing, if you get a lightweight paraglider, make sure that it's made using Skytex Classic 2 rather than Skytex Classic. That's the 27 gram cloth, and the 2 is the fact that it's dual coated, so it's a bit like a Gore-Tex, the way well, not really like Gore-Tex, but it's this idea of both sides of it have a impermeable membrane put on them. The single layer stuff just doesn't last quite as long. We see that in the porosity testing, but the double skin gliders are lasting just as long as a full weight glider these days. Couple that with the idea of having a reversible harness, and anyone can come and do this race now. You don't need to be a club pilot with a 15 or 18 kilo rucksack anymore, and it just opens up these options. And the only challenge really in organising the race, apart from getting a motivated group together, is the weather. And I don't want the race to ever be a foot race or just a foot race. Often people do end up on the ground, of course, but it's important to me for the ethos of Hike and Fly that there is some flying. So we always have a fallback weekend. We've got a Telegram group. I try and keep everyone updated. We've got access to some really good weather forecasting, like the spaghetti model on metbrief.com. I can show you that later if anyone's interested. But get these long outlook forecasts and just try and get the weekend. Get enough buy-in that we can have a successful event, because I would hate it if it just rained for 2 days. It would be pointless. It's not my scene. It's not why I'm into this at all. And we've been very lucky that we've always had someone fly during the races. And as you saw in September, most people got to fly at least once. So it does add a lot of value to the Hike and Fly racing. And interestingly, I suppose compared to just downwind XC flying, in a race like this, when you start joining the dots on a paraglider, you really realize how good it is to be in the air for 5k. Just bridging a gap between 2 hills makes the world of difference. In a 2-day race like this, you will put little hops in. You could be in your 2nd or 3rd year of flying, and you could fly over Greg Hamilton's head this year. You know, he was on the ground having made a risky call, and you'd be blown away, wouldn't you, by your decision to maybe wait another 10 minutes and then fly. So you get a lot of reward from it in that respect. The future is we've got another race planned for the 22nd and 23rd of May. There will be a fallback weekend, which is going to be the 12th and 13th of June. But in between then, you're also going to have an X-Lakes race at the end of May, and then X-Scotia is coming back on the 5th and 6th of June. So potentially we're going to have 3 UK Hike and Fly events in 3 weeks, if we're blessed with weather. So it could be a fantastic end to the spring there. And I'm always keen to get more people, especially guys flying EMB, who are not low airtime, as that term goes nowadays, but people who are just pilot rated or starting to get that little bit more experience with making decisions. Come and join the event, because we have a good time. And it's growing as a bit of a community, and it's a friendly scene. It's the racing is second definitely to the adventure, and everyone having a lot of fun together. And that's the gang. That's not this year, I might add, because we were all masked up. But 2018, beautiful, glorious sunshine, and we had a fantastic event. And I think half of the guys had gone home, so we had a big old gang, everyone chatting away about their different experiences. So it's lovely way to spend a weekend. Is anyone got any questions? Just I'll take a breath.
You talk about the range of competitors, Ali. What's the age range? Who's your oldest competitor?
Oldest, Steve. I can't remember Steve's surname. I think he's nearly 70, and he's done every race. And he's a fit guy, and he's an ultra runner, like still doing long distance runs. And then Harvey, who I taught to fly last year, who's 14, he entered. I think he's 15 now, so he entered in September. And that was, quite a broad range, isn't it, really, for an event? Of course, I then get, can we have a seniors class? Can we have a juniors class? Can we have a ladies class? And it's like, again, it's like, no, you're all in it together. This is an adventure. Just go and have fun. Otherwise, it gets a wee bit too complicated. But yeah, great age range, and we've had, I think, only two. Better get this right. I think 2 female competitors, so we need more ladies as well. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about this ethos of hike and fly, and perhaps how it's helped me with flying, just as a sort of a next chapter really to the talk. So it's a really broad discipline. I think it gets lumped in as like, oh, you're a hike and fly guy, but actually you could all be doing a bit of hike and fly. You could leave your car at the bottom on a ropey day where you're probably going to end up in the bottom landing anyway. Rather than scrounging a lift at the end of the day, you're just at your car and you can crack on. Especially COVID times, when you're not supposed to be having anyone in your car, maybe it makes sense. There's a lot of sites we fly here where you end up with cars at the top, like everyone's car at the top at the end of the day. It's crazy. It could be getting a 16-meter single skin glider, 3 or 4 kilo backpack, and walking up a huge mountain, Snowdon, Scarfell, and having an amazing. You spend a night out. You just fly down in the evening, having had a picnic. You could strap your dog onto the front, as a lot of people are doing now. You can race. You can get now totally available to the public 7-kilo rucksack with an END glider or an ENB glider, either, but state-of-the-art technology designed for hike and fly. You get a pod harness that weighs less than 2 kilos. Again, accessible to everyone. We're talking about first pod harnesses here with upright seated position like the Strike. These aren't reclined racing harnesses that you're going to get twisted up. Like really, really accessible gear. You can get a parachute that weighs like 700 or 800 grams now. Lightweight helmets, everything you can get very easily geared towards this style of flying. If you don't want to go that extreme, you could get a glider that's like 4.5 kilos. That's sort of in between sort of semi-light construction on the bottom. And that glider is going to be a totally normal wing in terms of your ownership of it. You could do vol bivouac. So you could go and try and cross the Indian Himalayas. We've got a guy who's been flying a long time here, but never really done any vol biv. And he goes, I'm going to cross Nepal. So he did that last year. You could go through the Alps with a credit card, like Tim Pentreath does, and camp and do amazing flights. And then if you end up at the bottom, get a chairlift, get a nice pizza. So this is a huge thing, and it's growing, and it's great thing to be part of. Even flying speed wings, like ski toured up like halfway up the side of Mont Blanc, and then we speed ride down it. It's amazing. So incredible experiences that you will only see if you're prepared to put a little bit of legwork in. And I suppose we would call it hike and fly. Fitness. So not that you need to be fit to do this, but you get fit by doing it. And rather than puffing and panting your way up the hill and then being baggage when you're on takeoff, soaking wet, you forgot to bring a spare t-shirt with you, and then it's maybe a light wind day and there's a couple of guys scratching, you're never going to be the guy who takes the risk on that thermal, that bird that's climbing out. Whereas if you maybe a little bit fitter, you've got slightly lighter gear, you're going to punt off on that red kite that's climbing. You might be the first person to climb out that day and have a more airtime, a longer flight. You'll fly in lighter conditions. You improve your flying by flying in lighter conditions. You get the opportunity to fly further as well because you're in the air for longer. And of course, the benefit is we get fitter by doing it. And by rolling the dice on the times where you do bottom out, of course, you then get to hike up and you still get another flight later in the day, just like everyone else. I think a lot of us start paragliding because we see the guys flying in the mountains, be it if we're younger or midlife when we start, that you see paragliding, you are expecting that to be a mountain sport with some hiking involved. Then we get our gear, we realize that actually it's quite tiring walking to the top of the hill. The gear weighs maybe 18 kilos, the rucksack's not particularly comfortable, and we start driving to the top of the flying sites. And to a lot of pilots, the idea of hike and fly is just lost quite early on. And you look at competition flying, it's kind of the antithesis of hike and fly, but actually there's a lot of comparisons, I suppose, in some ways. Like, these guys are carrying 27, 28 kilograms in a rucksack. Like, it's hard to call that thing a paraglider, really. And it's certainly not something you're going to walk up a mountain with. It's only in a rucksack because it folds up. Everything else to do with the technology of that wing is trying to make it not a paraglider. Whereas if we hike and fly, it perhaps brings us back to that basic thing of you are in the mountains. You're kind of more at one with nature without sounding too much of a hippie. But it's that simpler form of flying, and gives us access to more adventures because of that. And yeah, it's that simplicity. You do away and get rid of all that kit. I think, 2 or 3 GPSs that most of us carry these days, all this other stuff that we don't need. Most of the chat now on the groups, like I'm trying to turn it off. My computer's like telegramming now, ding, ding, ding. It's all about electronic conspicuity, XE this, XE tracer, XE track. It's great stuff, but it's kind of losing the innocence of the sport, perhaps, in some respects. Electronic conspicuity is fantastic. But get your eyes moving and enjoy the scenery around you and look out, because that's how you're really going to stop yourself hitting something else. I think being involved in hike and fly perhaps improves our decision making. You will be on your own more often, or in small groups more often, so you will get the opportunity to make decisions more often. When we fly in big groups, big ridge soaring groups on a club site, it's very easy to pimp. It's very easy to just follow forever. And although you may progress as a pilot, your decision making will perhaps never be tested. And for me, that idea of making my own decisions is one of the really rewarding parts of paragliding. And when that idea of rolling the dice, like when I roll the dice on a bird climbing, if I bomb out and a 500 meter walk back up a hill, if I get it right, I feel so much value in that, even if it results in a local soaring flight. But if it results in a 100k XC, you just feel so smug at the end of that day that it was your decision that got that opportunity. And then managing risk. I don't mean to say that you perhaps would take more risk, but I think because the onus is on your own decision making a lot more when you're on your own. Hopefully you make safe decisions, but also you just learn to manage risk better. You become more responsible. You perhaps carry a first aid kit if you didn't previously. You might take more water with you, more food. You're just less likely to be baggage in the event of an accident, be it you or someone else, because you just are a little bit more conscious about the environment that you're flying in. And all of that really just sums up as an attitude shift from being a hill soaring, top driving pilot towards being hike and fly pilot. Perhaps sums it up as an attitude shift. I just was told by my computer that I've got an unstable connection. Do I look stable to everyone? Am I stable, Martin? Is it all good?
Famous last words.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I thought I'd talk a bit about equipment. So like one of these things, like what do you need to go hike and fly? Right. You just need your normal kit, and actually you need less stuff. So half the stuff that you were taking with you, just leave it out. You probably need a spare t-shirt, especially in the springtime, so that you're not freezing cold on the takeoff. But really pare it all back, and if you do need to know if you're going up or not, then one of these little beepers is absolutely fine. Strip it all down, as long as you know where your airspace is, or you haven't got controlled airspace to worry about. Pare it right back, save that weight, and you'll be amazed. Most pilots, by the time we've been flying 2 or 3 seasons, the amount of stuff seriously get in that harness, because there'll be horrible things in there that you need to get rid of anyway and clean out. Mine certainly have been disgusting in the past. But if you want to get really into it, you could get some stuff, some sensible bits and pieces to get. First of all, hiking poles. Take the weight off your legs. Something like 30% easier walking up a hill with hiking poles. They're amazing. Make sure they go into 3 or 4 pieces. Don't get telescopic ones because they'll put you in the back of your neck when you land. It's not very safe. Whereas if you get proper compacting ones, you can wrap them up in your bags and they're not going to cause you hazards if you were to land on your bum. Something like a GPS watch, like a little Garmin watch. If you need to know where you're going, you put a route in. Just, you know, you might be on Strava, you might want to put some routes together, think how much training you're doing, so you can motivate yourself with some targets for the year or for the month. Some sort of tracking device is really handy. It's like a social responsibility almost to have one to some people. I use that orange thing, the Garmin, so I can just set it on live tracking when I go out. My wife knows where I am. If I have an accident, be it in Wales or in India, someone at least is going to know where I am. You can send messages to friends. But even if you don't use one like this, you can do it on your phone. Little apps like Tracker, Fly Sky High on an iPhone. So my wife's just walked in. Hello. Oh, just listening in the background. It's fine. Put together a bit of a first aid kit. Doesn't need to be crazy. That thing at the top is called a SAM splint. They're amazing. You just need that. It can actually add to your back protection if you put it under your seat, fold it up correctly. And of course you can put other things together, as we all know, for a first aid kit. Put some spare lines together, get a little power pack, which most of us have anyway, maybe a single-use poncho or some sort of anorak just to keep you warm if you're out in the mountains for longer than you would be. If you really want to go the whole host, start looking at lightweight flying equipment. The biggest single gain you will make is in the harness. So don't go rushing off and buy a lightweight wing, because your wing is probably only 800 grams, like something like that, lighter. Sorry, your wing is something like 800 grams heavier than a hike and fly wing would be. There's no big saving there. But that harness at the top, the Strike, that's the pod that I've been flying for the last 4 seasons. It weighs 2.1 kilos. It's amazing, like properly windproof. I can wear shorts in that thing in April at Cloud Base. And it's got a seat plate, it's got passive safety, it's certified, it's got a huge back compartment. You can take all the camping kit. So that's your next purchase if you want to get really, really light. And we're now looking at sort of sub 10 kilos. And of course, you could get a lightweight glider, and they'll be anything from sort of 3 to 4 kilos for most people's sizes of glider. By then, you're only maybe half a kilo or a kilo heavier than what Kriegel Maurer is racing in the X Alps with factory kit. And that's all totally available to every pilot. We're very lucky. And the other thing, and actually this might be higher up the list, is the best rucksack that you can get. Something like a Neo rucksack, which is very expensive but incredibly comfortable, is probably worth the money. They last a long time. And we do spend more time on the ground, unfortunately, than we do in the air. So you might as well spend it in comfort rather than jiggling around up the hill with an uncomfortable pack. So that's it really for kit. And the only other thing really is apps and maps. Something like View Ranger is free. You can also pay a little bit and get access to full world mapping. So you can start adventuring anywhere you want with these maps on your phone, able to find your way around. Finally, I thought I'd just talk about a mini adventure. Just maybe taking it up a notch from just walking up a hill, flying down. In the summer of 2018, as I'm sure you remember the good old days, we had a heat wave, and there was particularly in June, I think it was like 6,000 or 7,000 foot cloud base for about a month here. It was absolutely ridiculous conditions. And over a weekend, we had 2 days where it was forecast northerly. I think the whole of the country, the whole of the UK was just red on RAS, 5-star everywhere. And I think most people certainly down south, went to Leckhampton, and the vast majority of them flew the motorway route and ended up in Portland. A huge flight, 140k. And they did that on the Saturday, and I'm not sure if maybe did it again on the Sunday, right? Because you just get the train back and go again. I went with a couple of friends up to Llangollen, and we had a different plan. We were going to go from there to another site called 100 House in Mid Wales on the first day, and then that's about 100k. We were going to use other hills like Corndon to relaunch if we needed, and then the second day it was lighter wind, so we planned an FAI triangle, and then to fly home at the end of the FAI triangle. And I was very lucky that we made it. We made this happen. We spent the night in the tents, a proper vol bivouac across Wales. And that's a photo that Aaron took. We were at 7,000 feet over mid Wales. There was no one there, just the two of us. Most amazing 2 days. And I'm lucky enough to have some long distance cross country flights. I don't remember many moments of them or the broad experience of many of them. But moments like that weekend, I remember almost all of it. It's just fantastic. So perhaps there's something a bit special about hike and fly and vol biv. That's a briefing at I think a World Championships or a PWC. I've never flown at that level, but I have flying. There is mention, but it's not my scene, so I don't know a huge amount about competition flying. But I think it's well worth going to do some. It'll definitely improve your flying, and it will take you to some beautiful places around the world. You'll fly in mountains, flatlands, all over the place. But if you combine that style of flying, if you're looking to progress in this sport, if you combine that with a little bit of adventuring, a little bit of making your own decisions, I think together make you really broad, or give you a real broad base for your flying, and you come out of it really well-rounded. And these competitions are great. There's all sorts of comps in Europe for lower level pilots and higher level pilots, of course. But yeah, especially in 2021, we're probably not going to be able to do that much stuff overseas again. But if we end up out of lockdown and the ability to do at least a little bit of travel around our local areas and perhaps into Scotland or Wales, and you see a good forecast, well, consider traveling up for a couple of days. If you want to come here, I'm more than happy to give you some pointers of what routes might be available, and come and spend a couple of days with some friends up in the mountains, sat around a campfire and flying during the daytime. You'll have a good time. And I just thought I'd leave you with this. Is like this is when I said earlier, like the antithesis of comp flying. This is in Beer. This photo was taken by a friend, Cody, who's sadly not with us anymore. But we were flying at over 5,500 meters this day. And we only flew 55k, something like that, through the mountains. But over passes at that sort of altitude, again, that flight is just the front of my mind. It's not going to be something I ever forget. And yeah, if you put yourself out there and do a bit of hike and fly, you'd be very lucky you'll have these experiences. So I think I'll finish talking there, but if anyone's got any questions, more than happy to try and answer them.
Hi Al, Jason here. I've got a question for you. You know, I'm a relative novice, 20, 30 hours under my belt. If I was to come and do the hike and fly, I guess my thing would be, what kind of support would I get? You know, making sure I'm on the hill, are you on the end of a radio, a mobile phone, making sure I'm heading the right way, getting to the right places, all that kind of stuff. What is it genuinely like for a beginner like me to come and take part in that event?
Yeah, cool. Great question, Jason. Nice to see you, mate. It's been a while. So yeah, we've had beginners do the race, like really quite low airtime guys. I stipulate that it's pilot rated. However, there are a lot of club pilots now who've done several overseas trips guided and have quite a lot of mountain experience. So there's a bit of balance to be struck there, because perhaps for one reason or another, they haven't got the tasks that they need to in the UK to get the pilot rating. So I asked for a bit of a CV if the guys haven't got a pilot rating. So you can have a supporter. and I think it's probably the only race, and I think there's one in the Alps where they don't mandate a supporter, or in fact it's not allowed to have a supporter. But in this race you could bring your wife, Jay, and like bring her for the weekend, and she could nominally be your supporter. Essentially she's just following you around on WhatsApp, live tracking, really basic support, but give you, water and food as required. We've got a frequency, like the guys who want to be can share a radio frequency. And what you find is that you end up like gaggling up in little groups of 2 or 3. So you just end up with people of your level making decisions together, traveling together, perhaps spending the night in the hills together. And of course that adds to the camaraderie of it all as well. In terms of support, from me, like I give you a route briefing on the Friday night, give you a full weather forecast, any sort of things that are my concerns for the day or the days ahead. And someone like Dan, who knows the area really well, like the guys just ask Dan or ask Greg, like, what are you going to do tomorrow? And it's that sort of event. It's really friendly, and people are more than happy to share what their plans are. But yeah, Jay, come along, come and do it. If you're interested in like guided stuff, of course we run that here as well. So take guys out into the hills and do that sort of slightly higher level training to get you prepared for that gap really between club pilot and getting kicked out into a hike and fly race on your own.
Cheers, thank you, Al.
Cheers.
Jason, looks like we've got our first customer signed up for the pilot exam later this year.
Yeah. That's it. It's good to do it, definitely.
Hey Ali, any sort of less obvious tips that are really good if you're going to do this in a camper van?
Gosh, what, as in come to Wales, do the Dragon hike flight in the van?
Or not necessarily what you need obviously for food and sleeping, but anything that just makes it more comfortable. If you have a van.
So I suppose the one thing is being able to get clean is maybe not such a big deal on a 2-day race, but in Spain, the biggest thing, like you're covered in sweat, you need to be clean for the next day. Otherwise, your risk of picking up injuries and things increases. I suppose just like general horrible things like rashes and blisters. So yeah, a lot of fresh water is handy, and an ability to heat it ideally, so that you can have at least a bucket thrown over your head of hot water, because even that will feel good at the end of a day like that. Other than that, I know Rebecca's sat beside me. I'll leave her to think, see if there's anything else that comes up. Oh yeah, pack well. That's the thing. Our van's not particularly good in terms of storage, and it's easy just to make a complete mess in the van. So just pack, be OCD, even if you're not. Like shorts are in a pile, socks are in a pile. Maybe another one would be like a couple of pairs of shoes. I'm quite a big fan of Speed Cross trainers, so I had like 3 pairs of them for the race in Spain. And you can just put one pair on, put a brand new pair on. The things just fit like a glove and go again, because they get hot and wet, and it's quite nice to put the fresh ones on.
Cheers.
Yeah, not sure.
I'm not sure if I quite got it, but the Dragon hike and fly route, was that around the Crickhowell area, or was it that second map that you showed where you did the route through sort of from Llangollen? Was it down Wales? Yeah. I wasn't sure.
Which was it? Yeah, sorry.
We have to note.
So my dream for that Dragon is that we get 2 days of northerlies 1 year, and fantastic flying conditions like that, because I would probably give them that route or something very similar. We've never sent them that far north just because of the logistics of getting there, and of course a lot of the guys self-supported. It's going to be hard to get the vehicles up and back. So what we invariably have here in Wales is southwesterlies or westerlies, much like you do there. Those flying sites in the valleys are usable. I suppose another thing to mention with hike and fly is that if you're going soaring for the day, you will pick the best soaring site. So if you've got a hill that's north-northeast and the wind is north-northeast, you would go there rather than the northerly facing hill that's down the road. In a hike and fly race, it's probably less important, and the air mass is much more important to us. So I want good flying conditions once the guys are up, and we're backing them to be good enough pilots to climb out probably with a 45-degree crosswind. So given that we've normally had westerlies, the route essentially starts in the west and the guys fly to the east. If that's all I gave them, unfortunately, the local area isn't that big. So it would be over for the top pilots. The race might be over in a couple of hours, really. So at some point, I send you back into the wind. So invariably, that is going to involve an element on foot. And every year, we've done that in some way. And it's only a guy, Tony Blacker, who won the race in 2018, who managed to fly into a 20-mile-an-hour headwind for 4 hours on a C-wing and made it to this into-wind turn point. We still don't know how he did it. He doesn't know how he did it. He just followed the needle, is what he said. But everyone else was on the deck in the hills trying to ridge saw their way crosswind. So yeah, that 2-day thing was, I went with a friend and we just flew through Wales for a couple of days, just as an adventure, because we'd wanted to do it for a while. But yeah, the race, I've got to try and play with a 2-day weather forecast. Ideally, we'll end up 1 year with either 2 days of northerlies, and I send them way north, or 1 day of easterlies and 1 day of westerlies, and then I can give them a big out and return would be quite nice as well.
Okay, so you plan a date potentially, and then the route is figured out depending on the weather conditions a few days before. You'll sort of think, this is what you're
So I'm using like a web app called FlyXC, which you put red lines on a map and it tells you how far the route is, and then I build it into LiveTrack 24, and we build a task and we put radius on the cylinders, so some could be very small. If I want them to go to a pub, just make it 10-meter radius, or if I want them to go to a big mountain but it's windy and I don't want them to go too close to it, I put 3K on it, something like that. And then that brings in route options as well. If they've got a very big radius, they don't have to go as close, so they can choose different routes to access the radius or the cylinder that we've made. But yeah, I'm looking at that forecast going, yeah, it's going to work this weekend, but I don't decide the route until like 2 or 3 hours before the briefing, because the last RASP run for forecast is about 7 p.m. and I'm doing that briefing at 7:30. So finishing touches are potentially going on at that time. And this year, my buddy Matt Tandy, you might have heard of, I know some of you know him, was in Iraq building the LiveTrack 24 thing for me, because he's in the RAF working out there at the moment. And I was annoyingly going, can we add half a K to cylinder 3 and just change 2 and 4 around? But yeah, that's how we do it.
And for a sort of your average paraglider, how much hiking on the ground do you anticipate on average? Do you have any kind of like expectation you think, or expecting an average paraglider to do this much flying and this much hiking? Yeah,
so 2-day race, like 50 to 100K. We've never got anywhere near 100K nominal distance. It's just what I plan one day I would like to. The aim from a planning perspective for me is to get at least a third of the guys into goal. And unlike in a normal competition, that's what they would base the task around. For me, ideally, I would like everyone in the goal, but it's very hard to make the route that easy without the top guys just literally finishing it in a couple of hours. So as maybe like a pilot rated guy, 50 hours, a little bit of XC experience, or maybe someone who's once flown 50K, you hopefully would do some XC flying. You maybe fly the downwind element. You maybe do 30 or 40K XC. You'd be made up, because you'll be definitely mid-pack if you did that. Then that would probably put you on the ground day 1 in the afternoon. You'd then spend the rest of that day hiking to a takeoff for day 2. So maybe 4 or 5 hours on the ground, not racing pace, but hiking, just, fit guy hiking. And then day 2 is a sort of 2/3 of a day. Like, we've got to finish in the afternoon so that we can have a prize giving. So you then, if you flew well on day 2, you'd make the goal. That's always my plan really with the route. So I suppose to shorten that answer, you're going to hike for an hour in the morning to get to the takeoff, hopefully have a great flight, and then you probably hike for 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon on day one.
Thank you.
Totally manageable.
Yeah, that sounds manageable
Yeah.
for me. Yeah.
Ali, you mentioned something about spaghetti forecasts, and that sounds pretty cool for just general flying and spotting weekends in advance.
It is cool. I'm going to pull up a website for you, and we'll do a screen share. So you should see a website there called metbrief.com. And I was put onto this by a friend called Andy Claxton, who's a Navy meteorologist. And he showed me how to use this, if I remember. Right, synoptic weather forecast charts and computer model data. Let me click on that. And then we're going to go down, and it says Meteor Center, GFS, ECM, and GEM model comparisons. So go to that. And then you're going to go to type and put spaghetti. And then you're going to change it to France, UK. So as some of you may know, that if you checked windy now for tomorrow and you did the model comparison, you would see them in broad agreement for wind speed, direction, cloud, all that sort of stuff. If you looked 5 days in advance, they would start to disagree because the models are all interpreting the information that's put into them differently. Now, what we're looking for, especially in long-range forecasting for an event, is agreement between models, because it suggests that we're going to have some stability in the forecast, and it's very likely then to be a good day for us or a good weekend. Now, this website gives us data out to 240 hours, which I think is unique, or is unique in weather forecast websites that I've found to get that sort of outlook. So if we go to, I'll start here. So for tonight, you'll see that the models are broadly in agreement. There's a high to the north, there's a low pressure over northern Germany, and they're all in the same, right? The isobars are the same because it's a nowcast. If we look 3 days in advance, you can see the isobars are starting to move in relation to one another, but broadly you can see that we've got the 1024 is running straight across Yorkshire, so we're in high pressure in 3 days' time. Like, that's almost guaranteed. There's a high over the mid-Atlantic. It's actually a ridge extending. It could be flyable in 3 days' time. We can see that now, and it's likely that that's going to be a stable forecast because they're all in agreement. The reason it's called spaghetti is because this starts to happen when we go further out. You lose a couple of the models because they don't all do 10-day outlook. But and you're trying to pare down this information, it's not going to give you position of weather fronts. Also, the isobars are closer together than they are on a normal chart. So that's the 1016 and that's the 1024. So there's an 8 millibar difference in those red lines. That's actually quite a steep pressure gradient. So it might be windy, whereas on a Met Office chart, that would be a slack wind gradient because there would only be 4 hectopascal difference between the two red lines. So it takes a little bit more interpretation, but as you can see, a 10-day forecast is quite unstable. The models don't agree quite as much. But I suppose May and June, they tend to agree a little bit further out because the weather conditions we tend to get in the summer are more stable. So this becomes a really useful tool for summer XFED planning, for not just for us, but anyone who wants to use the mountains, I suppose, or go and do outdoor stuff. That's it, Rosie, yeah.
That's really good. I've got a new tool to plan when I want days off work now, you see.
Absolutely, and there is loads on this website. It's an encyclopedia of weather forecasts. This thing is crazy. There's a lot on it. Well,
I'd just like to say, Ali, if there's no more questions from everyone, on behalf of everyone from the Dales Club and those other clubs who dialed in, it's been really, really informative. it's really nice to see someone with such passion and just a general appreciation for the love of flying and the love of being outside. It's something that certainly echoes the sentiment. I echo like the sentiments that you talk. That's what I'm about. So it's really nice to encourage everyone to have a bit of a hike out and make a day of it, rather than just driving to the top and lobbing off and landing at the bottom, which might always happen, but
yeah. Well, thanks, Rosie. Yeah. And at the moment, you guys are only allowed out once a day, right? You're not allowed to go flying. So take your paraglider for a walk. Go for a vol bib in your garden if you're super brave in January. Try out that sleeping bag. Get that gear ready for the summer, because you will be released at some point. And you better be ready to go and have some fun.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. Like I say, on behalf of the club, thank you very much for taking your time out of your schedule to talk to us. It's much appreciated.
Cheers, Rosie. Cheers, everyone. My pleasure. Absolutely.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, Ali. Thank you.
Cheers, Ali.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you very
helpful.
much. Thank you.
Very, very inspirational, Ali. Cheers for that.
Cheers, Ali. I suppose we should thank Rebecca as well.
Yeah, she's here actually with the little dog.
I'm quite impressed that you're still married after your support adventure together.
They've only been married about 6 months or something. It's quite an undertaking.
So was it by mutual agreement that you wouldn't do it again then, together?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it'll be a bit much. Martin, do you know Andy and Christine Hasler? Those names from the BCC?
No, don't think.
No, okay. So they were like they're older than us, like in their 50s or late 40s, early 50s, and they just got married. And
Right.
They came out on their honeymoon to be like part of the support team. Poor old Andy ended up like doing the vast majority of it, because Rebecca was just chilling out.
Right. Okay. That's an interesting way of spending your honeymoon, isn't it?
Yeah. and then after like 4 days, I think Christine said to Andy, "Yeah, this is not Borns to Fly. We're going to a spa."
Yeah.
Because she'd come, like she'd been to Annecy like 3 times with us flying. Like loved the Borns to Fly. The fact that it was like 2 days of fun, and then it's back in the pub.
Yeah.
But, a bit different.
Après flying.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking for photos earlier, and this little video of Rebecca après at the X-Pier. She was, having quite a good time in the bar. But I won't share that one.
No, probably best not. All right, Ali, lovely to talk to you.
Oh, cheers, man. Yeah, good to see you, man.
See you on a hill in the spring after Easter.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Cheers, buddy. Bye-bye.
Yeah.